According to myth, Rome began as a chaotic asylum city, famously founded by twin brothers after one murdered the other to take control. 6 more kings followed in his footsteps, ending with a monarch so relentlessly cruel that the citizens of Rome expelled him entirely. They decided to scrap the concept of a monarchy altogether. To replace the king, they invented the Roman Republic. Instead of one ruler, they elected 2 consuls who could veto each other, swapping them out every single year. The goal was to ensure no single person could ever hold absolute authority over the state. Then the Gauls invaded. They marched past Roman defenses, burned the city to the ground, and left only after securing a massive ransom in gold. Humiliated, the Romans resolved to never be victimized again. They set out to preemptively conquer any neighbor that posed even a theoretical threat. This combination, a paranoid political system terrified of kings, and a society obsessed with total security, built a massive, unstoppable war machine. This map shows Rome's borders aggressively exploding outward, absorbing Carthage, Greece, and Gaul, controlling 1/10 of humanity. But looking at the center, you see the problem. Rome governed a global empire using a tiny municipal government designed for a single city. Out on the far frontiers, the system broke. Without strong central administration, soldiers stopped fighting for the Senate and started fighting for the charismatic generals actively paying and feeding them. Julius Caesar weaponized this dynamic perfectly. After conquering Gaul, he marched his fiercely loyal legions straight into Rome, collecting political offices like dictator, consul, and high priest all at once. The Senate watched him absorb the state and panicked. Desperate to prevent a return to the days of kings, a group of senators assassinated him right on the Senate floor. But the public loved Caesar, and his death instantly triggered another brutal civil war. The Senate learned the hard way that laws and vetoes no longer mattered. Real political sovereignty belonged exclusively to whoever controlled the military. Augustus, Caesar's heir, understood exactly why the Republic failed. To stop the cycle of civil wars, he had to detach the legions from rogue commanders and centralize them under one undisputed leader. He stripped away the tradition of raising temporary militias for single campaigns. Instead, he built a massive, professional standing army where soldiers enlist for structured 20-year terms. Rather than expanding outward forever, Augustus ordered those legions to stop and dig in. They secured boundaries like the Alps and the Rhine, turning the empire into a hardened fortress. This flowchart demonstrates how the new system guaranteed loyalty. Land grants and retirement packages no longer came from a general promising loot for rebellion. They came straight from the government treasury to the soldier. By cutting out the middlemen, Augustus successfully monopolized military force. This single administrative fix ended the civil wars and stabilized the state, creating what we now consider Rome's golden age. But Augustus made one glaring mistake. He stationed a heavily armed security detail, the Praetorian Guard, directly inside the capital. By physically surrounding the emperor at all times, they filtered information reaching the throne, quietly steering imperial policy. Soon, they dropped the subtlety entirely. If an emperor annoyed them, they assassinated him. At their worst, they murdered the emperor and literally auctioned the throne to the highest bidder. With legitimate succession reduced to violence, generals across the frontier started marching on Rome for themselves. This kicked off a period of constant civil war, plagues, and hyperinflation hollowing out the economy. The soldiers specifically stationed in Rome to protect the head of state had become the exact mechanism tearing the state apart from the inside. This graphic shows the empire's ultimate survival strategy. It had grown too massive and chaotic to rule from one desk, so administrators decided to slice the empire into distinct, geographically separate halves. The intellectual elite, the trade networks, and the tax revenue all gravitated toward the east, setting up a new, highly defensible capital in the city of Constantinople. The eastern half of the empire flourished under heavy fortifications and a booming Christian-led economy, while the Latin-speaking west was essentially abandoned, slowly turning into an empty ghost province. Without the eastern tax revenue, the West couldn't afford to pay its own legions. Their entire survival now hinged on a desperately underfunded border defense. And then, a crisis hit the frontier. The sudden arrival of the Huns displaced neighboring tribes, forcing tens of thousands of Gothic refugees to cross the Roman border and beg for asylum. The Roman administration let them in, but corrupt local officials immediately began extorting and starving the refugees instead of absorbing them into the system. Pushed to the brink, the Goths violently revolted. 2 years later, they completely dismantled a Roman army and killed the emperor on the battlefield. Terrified and unable to field a proper military response, the West began cutting desperate deals. They handed over chunks of sovereign territory to armed foreign groups, hoping land grants would convince them to stop attacking. By 476 AD, there was no epic final battle to destroy the West. A Germanic commander quietly asked the last emperor to step down, and he did. The state dissolved simply because it had completely surrendered its monopoly on military force.